Senator Ludlam.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise to speak on the Commonwealth Electoral Amendment Bill, and what a long time coming this has been. I've resisted directly contesting some of the weirder assertions about this bill floating around online, some of them based on the sort of deliberate misinformation that we just heard from Senator Lyons, but some of them based on genuine concern about what's happening in here this week. And this debate is complex enough that I haven't tried to rebut some of these things in 140 characters, so apologies if you've approached me directly in the last couple of weeks and not got a proper reply. I'm going to try and set out my reasoning here now. Anybody following this debate will understand how complex questions of electoral reform can get, but there are some simple principles underlying the approach that the Greens have taken. The purpose of the electoral system is for the composition of our Houses of Parliament to as closely as possible reflect the voting will of the electorate. Should be uncontroversial. The system for the House of Representatives fails this test miserably. If we can say that the Australian Greens vote nationally is somewhere between 12% and 14% at the moment, then we should have north of 18 members in the 150-seat House of Representatives. No such luck. Adam Bandt, due to talent and hard work, remains our only member of that Assembly because there is no proportional representation in the House. Now, that's a campaign for another day, but I raise it because historically the Senate's electoral system has done a much better job of turning the popular vote into representation in this chamber, because of the proportional nature in which in a normal half-Senate election you elect 6 senators, not just 1. But we all know, because until very recently there was near unanimous agreement on this, that the system of group voting tickets in this Senate is being abused. Call it what you will, gamed, manipulated, quite expertly by people who know exactly what they're doing. And there is nothing democratic or representative about a tiny handful of individuals spawning off a proliferation of prefab parties with engaging-sounding names, identical memberships, and then manufacturing these group voting tickets designed to funnel people's votes into almost random aggregations in which election to this chamber has turned into a lottery. Election to the Australian Senate should not come down to preference whisperers quietly shunting people's votes from left to right on behalf of the in excess of 95% of voters in some states who vote above the line. In the 2013 election in WA, these preference harvesting operators nearly pulled off their peak achievement, getting an individual from one of these prefab parties elected on just under 0.25% of the vote, while a thoroughly decent Labor member of this parliament looked to have lost her job despite polling in excess of 11%. The aftermath, I should say, of the 2013 election was the JSCAM report that Senator Rhiannon and her colleagues worked very hard on, which took 6 months and led ultimately to the bill that we're debating today. Now, Labor say that they love diversity in the Senate, apparently even if it means throwing one of their own under a bus to somebody whose name might as well have been drawn out of a hat. Labor loves Senate diversity so much that one of their 3 stated objectives for the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters inquiry, and I'll quote, was to clear the political landscape of micro-parties and eliminate their cartel. Good work, Labor. I wonder if their preference operators have been spelling that out to the crossbenchers in their fevered attempts to milk their own hypocrisy for vanishing electoral advantage. Good luck with that. One thing that we've been asked a lot, though, over the last few weeks, and I've got a bit of sympathy for this question, is why are the Greens supporting the Turnbull government on anything, let alone a question as sensitive as Senate voting reform? And the answer is reasonably simple. We're supporting it because it is substantially our bill. It's a proposal that we've championed since well before the geniuses in the Labor Party accidentally elected Senator Stephen Fielding to this place in 2004 on a tiny fraction of the vote. Here is the thing. Henceforth, you, the voter, will decide where your preferences go, not the Sussex Street hacks who have been screaming the loudest this week. You decide. Candidates are going to have to work for your vote instead of trusting to secret deals done in secret meetings. The only time that the ALP care at all about a number of issues is when it's politically expedient to do so. Labor did nothing in government to progress marriage equality, and they shut down progress at every opportunity. And now, from the safety of opposition, we're expected to pretend that that never happened. Well, guess what? I've been here through 5 prime ministers who did everything that they could in office to block marriage equality. Prime Ministers Howard, Rudd, Gillard, Abbott and Turnbull. And the sad stunt that you put Senator Lionhelm up this morning to try and deflect from your own hopeless inadequacy will fool precisely nobody. See you next Thursday for the marriage equality debate that you did everything in power to avoid when you were in government. My colleagues and myself have sat through all manner of hysterical lectures from the Labor Party this week about voting with Mr Turnbull because he happened to put his name on a Senate voting reform proposal that we have been championing for 12 years. So let's talk about voting with the government for a bit. I had to sit with my colleagues and the crossbenchers on that side of the chamber on the night that the Labor Party gifted this country with Prime Minister Abbott and Attorney General Senator George Brandis mandatory data retention. Passive mass surveillance over 23 million Australians. We had to sit there while you let burning of native forests get into a watered-down renewable energy target. What acts of utter genius. You did that in support of the Abbott government, and you didn't have to do that at all. When the Labor Party voted to lock up children in detention, to introduce border force and a 2-year jail term for anybody who was working with detained asylum seekers from reporting suspected child abuse. If you want to talk about the impacts on progressive politics of voting with the Abbott-Turnbull government, really, let's have that conversation. It's one that we are more than ready for. For a party that has voted with the government more than 40% of the time, and those most savage impacts of the Abbott short, miserable tenure of the Abbott government that actually wound up in law are there because of Labor Party complicity. If you want to talk about the comparative records of the Labor Party and the Greens for progressive politics, and you want to seriously bring that into the next election, we are ready for that debate to be had. I worked, and Senator Seward, Senator Milne worked for 8 years to stop the government from dumping radioactive waste at Mucking.
Order. It being 10:30, the debate is interrupted, and I propose that the Senate now adjourn.
Senator Ludlam, in continuation.
Thank you, Mr President. Well, last night I spoke about the principle of voters directly controlling who they elect, rather than leaving it to self-appointed professional preference allocators. And I did express some opinions at the time about how this idea has somehow become controversial during the course of this debate. And there is no question that the Labor Party's principled defence of backroom preference allocators has caught the imagination of some people online, including a few people who I figured were smart enough to know better. Now, when a ballot paper ends up measuring a metre from side to side, and when the Electoral Commission has to hand out little magnifying glasses so that you can read the fine print, and when you realise that people are going around boasting about how many front parties they have set up in order to funnel preferences to themselves, something has gone deeply wrong with our electoral system. In the wake of the 2013 election, where the preference engineers had their finest hour, in preference slingshotting random candidates past people with 20 times more votes, the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters spent months trying to work out how to put the power back into voters' hands. This is the model that the cross-party Joint Standing Electoral Matters Committee came up with, to abolish the machinery of group voting tickets and let voters decide who gets elected. Now, it's true that this bill is not identical to the JSCEM model. It is different in a couple of quite important respects. The JSCEM majority report recommended raising party registration fees for some reason that I still don't understand. This bill fixes that. It also recommended a model that could have effectively promoted a just vote one system, which undermines the power of our preferential voting system. This bill fixes that too. Let's hear about what that committee had to say. Here we go. Labor's preferred position would see a requirement that ballot paper instructions and how to vote material advocate that voters fill in a minimum number of boxes above the line, while still counting as formal any ballot paper with at least one above the line. Well, congratulations. We managed to get the Labor Party model into law. Wonderful. There has been a bit of debate about the fact that you can already number the candidates in order of your choice, and you do that by voting below the line. And I want to refer briefly to some research that was done by Ben Rowie on tallyroom.com.au, where he actually looked at the data of what happens to the people who vote below the line, who decide to just exercise their democratic mandate in full, which I've done plenty of times myself, and number all the boxes below the line. And the research that he conducted on some of the larger ballot papers, and New South Wales being one of the craziest examples, is that the informal rate, the number of votes that end up in the bin, is as high as 28% for people voting below the line, because it's just so hard particularly when the ballot paper is a metre side to side and you're trying to number candidates whose names are written in 4- or 5-point type to get it right. And so nearly 30% of those votes end up in the bin. And he found a very strong correlation between the number of candidates on the ballot paper and the number of people who simply end up voting above the line. They just can't be bothered. And rather than punishing these voters for not having the time or the inclination to vote below the line at that 30% risk of their vote ending up informal, rather than punishing those people, we should make voting easier. We should make the system simpler. That was what the Labor Party's submission to JSCEM said. Well, we got that embedded in the bill, thanks to years of tenacious work by Senator Lee Rhiannon. Labor have decided, for reasons best left to them, to take the low road. And your own spokesman described your arguments as dumb. He was right. It's hard to disagree. Your speeches may as well have been written by the same software that the ACTU is using for its robocalls. Now, the press gallery has been nearly unanimous that this is a sensible reform. The Labor Party has been left to run its campaign in the form of high-pitched unhinging online, which has caught up a few people who figure out that where there is so much smoke, there must be fire. But ultimately, you are just smoke. I do want to acknowledge, because their names have come up a couple of times in this debate, Senators Bob Brown and Christine Milne, former Australian Greens leaders who moved the debate forward and prepared the ground with bills, with speeches in here, with dedicated committee work, and with running the argument and getting the argument up in the public domain. And I want to acknowledge 12 years ago, Senator Brown moved on behalf of the Australian Greens in this place the first bill for reform similar to that we're debating today. And I also want to acknowledge Senator Lee Rhiannon, who brought the energy and determination that got this reform done in the New South Wales Parliament to this Senate over the last couple of years. And of course I want to acknowledge Senator Richard Di Natale for standing firm against the self-interested hysteria and outright weirdness that has been thrown at him in the last couple of weeks, for keeping his eye on the bigger picture and getting this done. Now, there is a lot of anxiety expressed in Labor senators' heartfelt and terribly earnest speeches about how this bill will hand the coalition a Senate majority, which will allow all kinds of hideous bills to be passed in a joint sitting after a double dissolution election. Now, the numbers, just the raw numbers, to support this argument brazenly don't stand up. But even if they did, it's actually beside the point. Here is a piece of advice for anyone in the ALP who has expressed these sentiments. How about you have a go at winning the next election? What if you went out and actually campaigned on the kind of progressive flagship issues that inspired previous generations of progressives and try and actually win for a change? The Labor Party's entire strategy for opposing this reform, that you have conveniently forgotten you agreed with until about 5 minutes ago, has been premised on losing the next election and sitting by in self-righteous helplessness while the Abbott-Turnbull government passes God knows what. Snap out of it. Get in the fight or get in the bin. There is a reason that you have been abandoned by 2 generations of progressive voters, and you have been wearing those reasons on your sleeves these past few weeks, through you, Mr President. If the numbers in this chamber are not reflective of a mix of Labor, Green and progressive independents, then it is because we haven't persuaded a majority of the electorate that our ideas should prevail all the way into the legislature. So rather than fighting sensible changes that will finally stop senators from being elected by Glenn Drury's random number generator, get out and campaign on the issues that people actually care about. I am very much looking forward to putting this bill to a vote and getting it done after 12 long years since Senator Brown first tabled a bill with the same intent as the one that we are debating tonight. Talk it into 3 o'clock in the morning on Thursday if you want. Talk it into September if you feel like it. In the end, this bill will become law and not before time.
Thank you.